In this course, we have not learned a lot about queer cinema. This video essay aims to complement class content and engage in a critical analysis of two Hong Kong queer films, Happy Together by Wong Kar-wai and Butterfly by Ye Ye Mak. Throughout my analysis, I will also make connections to course materials. Overall, the main body of this video essay will be divided into three sections. The first section will focus on Happy Together and argue that through presenting the lives and struggles of Asian queer diasporas, Happy Together casts doubt on heteronormative cinematic traditions and embraces queerness and fluidity. This section will also explain how Happy Together exhibits a heavy focus on personal memory and microhistory and further effectively connects queer individuals' microstories with larger historical trends and developments. Following the first section, the second section of this video essay will then shift attention to the film Butterfly. The second section will discuss the connections between Happy Together and Butterfly and argue that similar to Happy Together, Butterfly likewise challenges heteronormativity in the existing film industry and explores topics such as memory, microhistory, and micro-macro connections. Finally, after clarifying the commonalities shared by the two films, the third and last section of this video essay will point out that Butterfly further differs from Happy Together because it defies the male-centered narrative presented by Happy Together and gives queer women voices. Butterfly can thus be considered a powerful queer feminist text. So, to begin with, I will first focus on Happy Together. The representation of the Asian queer men's diaspora in Happy Together does cast doubt on multiple cinematic traditions. So far, throughout this course, we have witnessed various forms of Asian masculinity in conventional cinema, such as the martial arts masculinity in Jackie Chan films and the kung fu masculinity in Bruce Lee films like Fist of Fury and Enter the Dragon. We have also witnessed the staunch masculinity and Confucian masculinity in John Woo films like The Killer. Nevertheless, Happy Together defies all the aforementioned forms of heterosexual masculinity and presents queer masculinity. Happy Together further shows the possibility for filmmakers to overturn the heteronormative Asian diasporas in films like An Auden's Tale and Comrades Almost a Love Story and construct a new kind of queer Asian diaspora. Overall, one can indeed conclude that Happy Together abandons heteronormative narratives and embraces queerness and fluidity. As argued by Dr. Quero, in heteronormative narratives, elements like time, identity, and relationship are all fixed, and there seem to be no fluid or malleable spaces. However, Happy Together presents an entirely different story. For one thing, in the film, time does not flow in a fixed, linear, and teleological way. Instead, the past, the present, and the future are all entangled. Right at the film's beginning, the male protagonist, Ho Ping-wing, smokes a cigarette and utters his classic line, "We could start over," to his boyfriend, Lai Yunfang. In the following voiceover, Lai Yunfang confirms that he and Ho have frequently been experiencing breakups as well as reunions. Like cigarettes, the romantic bonding between the two male protagonists is deeply pleasurable but also distinctly hazardous. Ho Ping-wing's emphasis on the possibility of starting over again denounces heteronormative temporality and demonstrates a radical, fluid, non-linear view of time wherein past failures of romance and present yearnings for future romance become inextricably entangled. Importantly, in Happy Together, not only does time flow fluidly, but identity and relationship also develop in fluid ways. Some scholarly articles about the film tend to focus only on the romantic relationship between Lai Yunfang and Ho Ping-wing. Nonetheless, I argue that it is crucial to also focus on another character, the Taiwanese male character Chang Che. Chang plays an important role in the second half of the film, and he develops a close bond with Lai Yunfang. Chang and Lai are not merely friends, instead, many of their interactive scenes have an almost romantic outlook. Rather than confining its characters to exclusive, one-on-one relationships, Happy Together thus shows the possibility of open, fluid, ambiguous forms of a relationship and questions heterosexual monogamy. So far, I've discussed how Happy Together casts doubt on heteronormative cinematic traditions and embraces queerness and fluidity. Moving on, I will adopt a more historical perspective in the following part and further explain how Happy Together pays attention to personal memory and microhistory. According to Dr. Ko, in the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, one can observe a focus on the microhistory of the Asian American diaspora. Moreover, according to Miranda M. Zato, in Ang Hui's movies such as Our Time Will Come and Son of the Exile, one can also see a microhistorical perspective and an overarching emphasis on the scene of memory. Similarly, Happy Together also adopts memory as one of its essential themes. Right in the film's opening scenes, one can hear the voiceover of the male protagonist, Lai Yunfang, and thus be informed that the movie will be structured around Lai's recounts of his own past. Like the female protagonists of the film Son of the Exile, Lai does not commemorate his past through official, grand national histories, but instead through personal and intimate memories. Lai detailedly remembers the intimacy that he shared with his partner and vividly narrates everyday, mundane experiences in the past, including experiences like changing bed sheets, showering, cooking, and dancing. Lai thus likewise possesses a microhistorical perspective. However, it is important to note that while Happy Together does heavily focuses on personal and microhistories, it meanwhile manages to connect queer individuals' microstories with larger historical trends and developments. In this course, we have already encountered films that delve into micro-macro connections. For example, as argued by Dr. Ford in her essay, the micro-story of the male protagonist Frank's success and upward mobility in the film Finding Mr. Right reflects a larger historical trend of Chinese diaspora directors attempting to assert China's power as an economic and cultural force and develop the idea of the Chinese dream. Such micro-macro connections also occur in the film Happy Together. The movie starts with close-up shots of the two male protagonists' passports. On the top of their passports, one can see that their nationality is still Britain. Later, near its end, the film then depicts the male protagonist, Lai Yunfang, watching TV news in a hotel in Taiwan. On the TV, the news broadcaster announces the death of the former Chinese president, Deng Xiaoping. These details immediately apply to audiences that, as a film set in 1997, Happy Together has connected its characters' micro-stories and experiences with the more significant historical process of Hong Kong's transformation from a British colony to a special administrative region of China. After the death of Deng, the succeeding Chinese president, Jiang Zemin, soon annexed Hong Kong. As argued by King and Annette Sosky, the film's portrayal of the unhappy romantic relationship between the two male protagonists may further be interpreted as a reference to Hong Kong's impossible happiness as it transitions from a past colonial togetherness with Britain to the inevitable future togetherness with China. Apart from having a connection with the macro-history of Hong Kong, the film's characters' micro-stories are further connected with the macro-history of the capital city of Argentina, Buenos Aires. Unlike movies such as A Northern's Tale, which shows Asian diaspora's experience in the global north, Happy Together situates its Asian queer diaspora in the global south context. By portraying the migration of its male protagonists from the global north city of Hong Kong to the global south city of Buenos Aires, the film troubles fixed geopolitical divides and constructs a kind of north-south connection and solidarity. Similar to Hong Kong, the city of Buenos Aires is likewise a place that is simultaneously haunted by its colonial and authoritarian legacies and its uncertain, risky neoliberal futures. A larger historical anxiety shared by both Hong Kong and Buenos Aires thus hides beneath the film's seemingly micro-historical narrative. So far, this video essay has completed an in-depth analysis of the film Happy Together. This video essay has explained how Happy Together casts doubt on heteronormative cinematic traditions, embraces queerness and fluidity, exhibits a heavy focus on personal memory and microhistory, and further effectively connects queer individuals' microstories with larger historical trends and developments. In the following section, this video essay will shift attention to the film Butterfly and explain the commonalities shared by Happy Together and Butterfly. Similar to Happy Together, it's a film based on a 1996 novella by Taiwanese lesbian writer Chen Xue. Butterfly also challenges the heteronormativity in the existing film industry. The Asian femininity depicted in Butterfly differs from the submissive femininity in Hollywood productions like The World of Susie Wong and Love is a Many Splendid Scene, and also diverges from the heterosexual middle-class Chinese femininity in Grace Chang films such as Member Girl and Spring Song. In fact, Butterfly overturns all of the aforementioned cinematic traditions and presents a kind of defiant, queer Asian femininity. Like the film Finding Mr. Right, which tells the story of a Chinese lesbian couple in the context of Seattle, Butterfly does not portray a heteronormative diaspora, but instead narrates the experiences of Chinese queer women in the context of Hong Kong. Migration and diaspora become especially important concepts in the film, considering the fact that one female character, Yip, is a migrant from the mainland Chinese province of Wuhan. Besides their shared defiance against the heteronormativity in the film industry, another connection between Happy Together and Butterfly is that both films explore topics such as memory and microhistory. Similar to Happy Together's male protagonist, Lai Yunfang, who consistently recounts his past, Butterfly's female protagonist, Flavia, keeps remembering about her ex-girlfriend in high school and her failed past romance. In the movie, whenever the grainy Super 8 film stock occurs, audiences will know that Flavia has started to indulge herself in memory. The film juxtaposes Flavia's nostalgia for her past love story with her present family trauma and romantic encounter. The past and the present do not exist in heteronormative linearity, but rather run parallel to each other, occasionally bumping together and progressively getting more entangled, constructing a non-linear queer temporality. Moreover, like Lai Yunfang, Flavia is not trapped by grand historical or national memories. Instead, Flavia likewise adopts a micro-historical perspective and recuperates minute details of her mundane everyday life in her teenage years. Overall, Flavia recounts multiple micro-experiences and stories in her past, including experience of intimacy that she shared with her ex-girlfriend in various indoor settings such as the school, the home, and also the bar. So far, I've argued that Happy Together and Butterfly are similar in the sense that they both challenge the heteronormativity in the existing film industry and touch upon topics such as memory and microhistory. Now, I will emphasize that the final commonality shared by the two films is that they both have successfully linked queer individuals' micro-stories with more significant historical trends and developments. Like Happy Together, in Butterfly, one can likewise observe multiple instances of micro-macro connections. The film's portrayal of an individual queer woman's migration and diaspora experience is inextricably related to larger historical trends. As we learned in MOOC Unit 3, in the 1980s and 1990s, under the more significant historical backdrop of globalization, flexible citizenship started to occur and many PRC residents began to move out of their hometowns and form diasporas worldwide. Considering the fact that in Butterfly, the female character, Yip, is a mainland Chinese migrant, the film illustrates how such a phenomenon of flexible citizenship has continued into the early 21st century. Yip's micro-story thus demonstrates the macro-historical reality that in the early 21st century, globalization has continued to develop and consolidate itself as an international trend, and many PRC women, including queer women, remained flexible transnational citizens. These flexible citizens do not necessarily have to migrate across large-scale geopolitical boundaries. Instead, they can reside within Asia and move from one Asian nation to another. In the case of Yip, she moved from the Chinese province of Wuhan to Hong Kong, thus illustrating a regional root of Asian transnationalism. Apart from exhibiting connections with the larger history of globalization, the micro-stories of the queer characters in the film Butterfly further have solid connections with macro developments in Chinese history. The film opens with scenes depicting adult Flavia's teaching career in an all-girls secondary school. In one of her classes, Flavia teaches a short story called The Weight of 30 Years. The story narrates how a mainland Chinese student reconnects with a teacher who had been abused during the Cultural Revolution. Later in the film, the incident of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre in China is further directly mentioned and referenced. In fact, Flavia's ex-girlfriend, Jing, actively responded to the event during her teenage years and participated in Hong Kong's activism against the mainland communist government. By incorporating such details into its main plot, Butterfly thus successfully connects its characters' micro-experiences with more significant turning points in Chinese history. Last but not least, the final form of micro-macro connection in Butterfly is the connection between queer women's individual life stories and the larger feminist and LGBTQIA+ movements in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. In the film, Flavia's ex-girlfriend, Jing, is deeply passionate about making political documentaries and interviewing Hong Kong lesbians. In one scene, one of Jing's interviewees says, "I'm not interested in politics, but politics is something we must deal with. As a human being, I cannot ignore it. I'm talking about resistance, resisting the confines that society gave us." Such lines directly situate queer individuals' daily micro-struggles within the macro-history of political activism and human rights movements against patriarchy and heterosexism. As argued by Dr. Alvin Wong, the film's portrayal of lesbian involvement in such social activism further informs audiences that there are still more stories to be told beyond conventional political historiography that often places masculinist leadership. Now, to conclude the first two sections of my video essay, I have elaborated on how both Happy Together and Butterfly challenge heteronormative cinematic traditions, champion queerness and fluidity, exhibit a heavy focus on personal memory and microhistory, and further effectively connect queer individuals' microstories with more significant historical trends and developments. After clarifying the commonalities shared by the two films, in the following third and last section of my video essay, I will then talk about their difference. Adopting Philippa Levine's film Suspicious viewpoint, I argue for the importance of remaining suspicious and critical toward Happy Together's male-centered narrative. In fact, Butterfly complements Happy Together's cinematic perspective and further differs from Happy Together because it defies the male-centered narrative of Happy Together and gives queer woman voices. Like the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, Butterfly presents a female-centered narrative and focuses on women's lives in diasporas. In this course, we have already encountered several powerful feminist films such as Dr. Quark's Blurring the Color Line. In Dr. Quark's film, Chinese immigrant women are not depicted as powerless victims. Instead, they have attempted to fight against existing racist and sexist structures. In the third and last section of my video essay, I argue that, overall, Butterfly can also be considered a powerful feminist text that challenges Happy Together's male-centrism. In Butterfly, feminist sentiments, specifically queer feminist sentiments, are expressed in two major ways. First, rather than confining queer romance to the past and Hume's time, Butterfly boldly imagines a queer present and also a queer future. As argued by Whitney Monahan, heteronormative narratives often relegate queer women's subjectivity and experience to the past. Heteronormative representations suggest the impossibility of lesbian futures as love between women appears to be culturally imaginable only in Hume's. However, in Butterfly, one can see that while Flavia remains nostalgic toward her past romance, she meanwhile successfully builds a new love relationship in the present and anticipates a bright future. Near the end of the film, Flavia and her present lover, Yip, appear to enjoy each other's company in the midst of the landscape of Hong Kong. In the ending scenes, they seem to have transcended the confines of heterosexuality and entered into a utopian lesbian home elsewhere. As claimed by Monahan, one way in which Butterfly expresses its radical queer feminist sentiments is thus through liberating queer subjectivity from the confines of the past and imagining a utopian future for queer women. Besides this, the second way in which Butterfly functions as a queer feminist text and expresses its radical queer feminist sentiments is by portraying queer women's defiance against patriarchal and heteronormative family structures. As we learned from Andre Yue's article, in An Hui's Song of the Exile, family can become a site of patriarchal oppression, but also a potential site of female bonding and feminist rebellion. This applies to Butterfly as well. In Butterfly, family can become an oppressive location for Flavia when Flavia needs to perform traditional feminine roles and do house chores for her child and her husband. Nevertheless, family can also turn into a happy, liberatory site where the intimacy between her and her lesbian lovers happens. As explained by Professor Marchetti, the minimal design and neutral color palettes of the family that Flavia inhabits with her husband contrasts sharply with the cluttered coziness and warmth of the families she shared with her girlhood sweetheart Jean and her new lesbian lover Yip. When Flavia stays with her husband in the heterosexual family, the movie seems duller and bluer. In contrast, when Flavia spends time with Jim and Yip in their lesbian families, the color of the scenes becomes warm and bright. Later, in one scene in the film, Flavia confides to her husband that she is a lesbian.
我冇好返啊，我係 lesbian， 冇變過㗎。
Such an act of coming out in the heteronormative familial setting can be interpreted as a direct challenge against patriarchal, oppressive family structures as well as a defiant manifesto of queer feminism. As implied by the film's title, similar to a butterfly, Flavia will eventually transform herself, break away from the patriarchal and heteronormative family, embrace her true love, and enter into a new free and joyful queer family. In conclusion, this video essay has connected with class materials, complemented class content, and engaged in a critical analysis of two Hong Kong queer films, Happy Together and Butterfly. This video essay has argued that, through presenting the lives and struggles of Asian queer diasporas, both films cast doubt on heteronormative cinematic traditions and embrace queerness and fluidity. This video essay has also explained how the two queer films exhibit a heavy focus on personal memory and microhistory and further effectively connect queer individuals' microstories with larger historical trends and developments. Apart from clarifying the commonalities shared by the two films, this video essay has further pointed out that Butterfly differs from Happy Together because it defies the male-centered narrative presented by Happy Together, gives queer woman voices, and expresses queer feminist sentiments. Overall, this video essay has analyzed Butterfly as a powerful queer feminist text.